a microphone for 25 people. But anyway, I will. My name is Tyler. I'm the Community Program Supervisor here. Welcome to Minnesota Zoo and the Our World Speaker Series. We know that you have a lot of choices for your time. I really appreciate the fact that you chose to be here tonight. It's a beautiful night, but it's air conditioned here, so even better. Want to say a thank you to MidPost and the Clean Water Land Legacy Amendment. MidPost is for our media sponsor. If you haven't checked out their Earth Journal blog, please do. It's an awesome blog. And then the Clean Water Land Legacy for making this a free event for you also. It's very nice that those two sponsors are on board. Tonight we have, in my opinion, an awesome speaker because it's about nature play. I don't know anybody who doesn't like nature play. Hopefully you all like nature play as well. I have to ask, does anybody know here, does the Minnesota Zoo have a nature play area?
Yes.
The grand opening was yesterday, but it technically opened on July 10th. If you have not been out there, it's a wonderful place. Yes, most people look at it for these people, but you can enjoy it too. I've climbed up pretty much everything, not quite everything, but soon to be everything. So you can too. It's not too far from here. It's on the Northern Trail out by the carousel towards the farm. Can't go tonight, sorry. But when you come back, please take advantage of that. It'd be awesome to head out there and take a peek at it. Nature play is important to the Minnesota Zoo because we think it's obvious that the more kids and people get outside, start really connecting with nature, the more they become stewards of the land. So it's really something that's really important to us. So hopefully it's important to you. Obviously, you're here for a reason, so it must be. At least I'm going to say it's important to you. So I'm going to be quiet and turn this over to something way more important and knows way more about this than I do. So I'm going to introduce you to our speaker tonight, Patty Born-Selly. She is the author of Connecting Animals and Children and Early Childhood Activities for a Greener Earth from Red Leaf Press. She's been involved in nature and science education for over 20 years. Quite impressive. She maintains a blog called Small Wonders about exploring the natural world with children. And currently she's a professor of environmental education and STEM at Hamlin University. So we want to thank Patty for coming up tonight.
Oh, good, okay. So now I just need to unmute this. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Is it on? Wow, okay. Thank you for having me out here. My name is Patty Born-Selly, as Tyler said, and I'm just really happy to be here. I've been coming to the zoo since I was a very young child, and it was one of the reasons that I was inspired to write a recent book about children and animals, because I've always been really connected to animals and have always had a real affinity for wildlife and wild creatures. And so I've been really excited to be able to collaborate with the zoo on a number of different things. And so I'm really grateful that you brought me out here. And I'm thrilled that the zoo has a nature play area. One of my areas of particular interest is early childhood and the impacts of natural spaces on young children's development. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the research behind why nature is so important for young children, why it's so beneficial for them on a lot of different levels, what some of the barriers are to getting young children outside to just play, and some different ideas and strategies for how we can support that as a community and as adults who care for children. So as we go through the presentation, please feel free, if you have questions, to just go ahead and ask me. I've got a sheet for you at the end with references, so if you're curious to dig into the research more deeply, I've got a lot of sources for you to explore, and then there's also a list of suggested destinations if you want to check out some nature play places, starting with the one here, of course, but do it during the zoo's open hours. So Tyler gave you an introduction. I did just want to add to that my background is an environmental ed. I started as a park naturalist many years ago and became really interested in what was happening with young children in nature, because I was tasked with this job of creating a series of naturalist programs for young kids, and I knew nothing about young children at all. In fact, I was pretty scared of them. They seemed really loud, and they were always usually kind of sticky and didn't make much sense to me at all. And so I decided that I needed to observe them in order to better understand them. And so I spent a lot of time watching kids and watching how they played, and I learned quickly that watching children playing in parks and natural areas was very, very different than the way they play when they're in a structured play setting, like a playground or at an organized event like a sports game outside. And so that got me really curious about what was really going on and what makes it so different, what makes those experiences so different from each other. So that's when I started doing research for my book and developed some courses and have been working in higher ed in recent years to help teachers and others who work with children to better understand the need for environmental experiences in early childhood. So again, the plan for tonight is we're going to talk a little bit about the barriers to getting kids outside, because there are a lot more than you might think. How many of you work directly with young children, maybe teachers or, okay. And then others of you, I assume, have children in your life in some context, maybe your parents, maybe your grandparents, or have some neighbors that you care about. So everybody who works with children has a different set of barriers that they face when it comes to getting children outside. So we'll talk about just some of the more common ones, but certainly it's not an all-encompassing list. We'll talk a little bit about the research around brain development and children's development of social emotional skills and mathematical and scientific thinking and how nature play helps to support that. And then we'll talk about different ways that we as adults can help support children's growth and development through nature experiences. So before we do that, please just take a minute to reflect on how you played as a child when you were little. What was that you liked to do the best? Doesn't matter what age, just kind of let your mind settle on an age and a really happy memory of when you were a child. And then if you're comfortable, please turn to the person near you and share a memory of how you played as a child.
Excuse me.
And while you're doing that, think about what your favorite places were. And just looking around, I'm curious to hear about folks' favorite places. So if anybody's willing to share a memory or a favorite spot that they enjoyed in childhood. Inside a tree? Excellent. Another one? Is there another favorite memory of how you played as a child or where, a special setting? Building forts under a fallen tree.
Mud.
Playing in the mud. Excellent. Timeless activity. Mine is, I used to have this great big, probably wasn't really all that big, but in my mind it was huge. It was a maple tree in my backyard, and I used to climb up the tree, and it seemed like the most monumental climb in the world, but I really don't think it was that high, but I felt like it was. And I would just sit up there and eat Oreos and while away the afternoon eating Oreos in this tree. So I think we all have a lot of really lovely memories of how we played as young children, and for most of us, those include places outside. Very few of us, when we're asked to reflect on how we enjoyed playing as children, very few of us will say, well, I loved watching cartoons on Saturday morning, or I just loved sitting, in my basement playing Candyland. Some people might choose that, but the vast majority of people have very fond memories of being outdoors and having special places. So the next question then is an interesting one. It's how comfortable are you encouraging these same activities with your own children or the children that you care for? And interestingly, when I talk to folks about this, a great number of them state that they aren't comfortable letting their kids do the same things that they did when they were young children. I have a fond memory of riding my bike, just leaving my garage and riding my bike until sundown, coming home and, having cereal for dinner and then going to bed and doing it the next day. And that's a really hard thing for a parent to do. Now, at the time, I don't think my mom struggled at all with letting me do that, but that was quite a number of years ago. And today it's a very rare thing for children to just be sort of let loose and have that kind of freedom. In fact, it's a thing now called free range parenting. Have you guys heard of that? So now there's a growing trend of that, and I think it's great. I just think it's interesting that we have to name it and that it's a thing. So just so we're all on the same page, and I apologize for the cough, so that we're all on the same page, these are the terms that I'm going to be using this evening. Nature play, of course, is free play, mostly related to children, although adults do it too. Free play in a natural outdoor environment. Free play is play that is directed and initiated by children. Excuse me. And then when I talk about nature, I'm talking about outdoor spaces that are relatively unmodified. So the nature play place here certainly qualifies for that. Nature play yards within nature centers and parks are considered nature for the purposes of this discussion. I think when we have really very constricted definitions of nature, it becomes really hard to find nature. And so I think the bigger our definition can be, the better. So in this context, I'm talking about outdoor spaces that are relatively unmodified, meaning few structures generally. So why are we even having this conversation? Why is nature play on everybody's lips these days? It sort of started back in, I would say, 2005, when a book came out called Last Child in the Woods. And that is a book that many people read, and many of us who were working in environmental education and the world of nature education had known all of this. We knew that there was something happening, there was a disconnect between children and nature. But this book, written by Richard Louv, really brought that to kind of the forefront of our culture, because he's a researcher and he had been looking at different ways that children play. And what he noticed was that children were finding and talking about experiences with electronics and activities that they did indoors a lot more than they seemed to be talking about enjoying time outdoors. And so he really got into that and wrote this book that documented kind of the decline in children's connection with nature. And so that really started kind of a bigger conversation, and since then a lot of educators and faith-based communities and the scientific community, the medical community, landscape architects, there's a whole lot of different disciplines that are really getting on board with looking at this problem of how our children have become disconnected from nature and what effect that's having on their growth and development, and what it's doing kind of culturally, what the impacts might be. Another reason that I think this is an important conversation to have is that these are the images that a lot of our children get when they're exposed to nature. They see it on TV, and usually they see it as a crisis or something really scary. They hear about problems that they can't solve. They hear about really scary and overwhelming things that are happening to our planet. And they, I think most of us feel pretty overwhelmed and pretty helpless when it comes to this sort of thing. And so when these are the images that our children see and what they're surrounded by, in exclusion from real, authentic experiences in the outdoors, they're separated a lot from nature. They have a strong feeling of apathy and fear and overwhelm, and so it becomes more difficult to connect them with nature. So the point of this conversation really is to help them come back to nature. We know that it supports their development. We know that it supports their growth, their emotional growth, their spiritual growth. We know that it helps them to have better relationships with one another. And as Tyler mentioned at the very beginning, we also know that when children spend a lot of time outdoors, a lot of time and with an adult who cares, they are more likely to become people who care about the environment and are willing to take action on behalf of the environment. And again, I do have some research cited here to back that up, but it's really fascinating. There's a lot of interest in what it is that makes someone grow up to be an environmental steward or an environmentalist, and the vast majority of people report that it's spending time outside with a grown-up who cares and who's really invested in that child's excitement. So we know that children spend less time playing outdoors. I don't think this comes as a surprise to anybody. But there's a varying degree of reports out around how much time children spend outside. Excuse me. Some say that children spend an average of 10 minutes outside a day doing unstructured activities. And that, there are other studies that place that number higher to 2 or 3 hours of time outdoors every day. Interestingly, the study that stated children spend 2 to 3 hours outdoors every day included a question about what you do outdoors. And 65% of the children who spend 3 hours outside a day spend more than 50% of their time doing electronic media outside. So it's really important to read the studies carefully because not all outdoor time is created equal, unfortunately. So let's think a little bit about some of the barriers, and I'm going to take a drink of water before I lose my voice completely. So while I do that, if you would just turn to the person next to you and think about 1 or 2 things that you would identify as a barrier to nature play opportunities.
You have a bird, right?
You want this? What is it?
Oh, thank you.
Yes, I appreciate that.
Interactive audio.
Yeah, it is an interactive. You promise it's only a throw ball?
Okay, so thank you. Thank you. What are some barriers that you were able to identify right away when you think about getting kids outside? Anybody just shout one out? Okay, not the other kids to play with or lure the children outside. Okay, what else? Lack of role models in the adults. Excellent. What do you guys see at work? What do you hear from parents about why their kids aren't going outside? Yes?
Kids are, a lot of the kids, I think, are latchkey kids, but back in previous years, it's a mom home or someone at home, and they're less likely to go out floating around their daycare or something like that.
Okay.
A lot.
Yep. So just a completely different structure of schedule and routine and what we remember.
I think they're mesmerized by media.
By media?
Mesmerized, they get, into a game or anything electronic, and I mean, I know myself, I sit down and all of a sudden it's 2 hours later. And kids are even more vulnerable.
Yeah, hard to tear oneself away from that, absolutely. And if you don't have a really determined adult who's ready to push and say no, then it can be very, very difficult.
Another thing, we have a creativity, celebrating creativity group thing that we have up in the roof. She and I do it with some other people. And we take them out for nature things, and then you hear, these are kids in 6th grade. Too hot, bugs, why do we have to do this? Too hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I would say too, like, I mean, I still consider myself a kid, I'm 17. But I think as you get older too, especially in school year, like, it seems every year there's more and more to do. So when you're younger, you get home and it's like, oh, I don't have any homework. Let's go outside. And then you get to be in high school and say, yeah, well, there's, I can't go outside. Like, there's so many other things and it just keeps going and going.
Yeah.
I think that's a really big issue too.
Yeah. And that happens even with the youngest children because they get scheduled for activity after activity after activity and literally don't have the time to go outside and play. So those are all things that parents and adults face. We also have a huge feeling that something really horrible is going to happen any minute. And that's a pretty legitimate fear. Nobody wants something bad to happen to kids, or adults for that matter. But we do have this, especially if you follow the whole free-range parent conversation, there's a lot of concern and suspicion that if you let your kids go too far ahead down the trail, something bad will happen. If you let go and they're further away, something bad is gonna happen. Someone's gonna grab them or something. And of course, that kind of fear can be a really huge barrier that can stop any well-meaning adult from letting their children have too much freedom. But what's happened, the violent crimes against children haven't increased in recent years. They've gone down, but we're hearing about it every single time something happens. So we get report after report that something, some suspicious white van drove down the street and all of a sudden the kids are back inside under house arrest because something is just bound to happen. And I say that not to minimize the importance of vigilance and safety and concern for children's welfare, but just to make the point that we have kind of this heightened sense of fear and anxiety about allowing our children freedom outside, and a lot of it is really out of perspective to the statistics and the facts. Thinking back to our earlier conversation about how we played as children and how different it is for young children today. Today, there's a study here that came out quite a while ago now, 2004, that looked at asked a bunch of mothers, how did you play when you were young? And most of them reported that they played outside and had relatively fond memories of being outdoors and playing. And then those same mothers were asked, would you let your own kids do that? And 82% of them said no. So what has that led to? We have this nation of really scared adults because we're convinced something bad is going to happen to our kids. And we also have terrified children. There's a growing number of studies that are coming out now that ask children where would you rather play? And they want to play inside, not just because that's where the electronics are, but it's their perception of where they're safe. So we're passing along that anxiety onto our children and making them feel fearful about being outdoors and playing. Here's a chart that just documents the decrease in violent crime. And again, I'm not trying to minimize crime. I'm not trying to minimize the potential for harm, but I do want to point out that we do have this, it's almost as if we could reverse this graph. And in our minds, we have this perception that crime has gone up exponentially, when in reality, that's not the case. So knowing that safety is a factor, but it's a bit, we're all a bit overly concerned that something horrible is going to happen. We also have changes in families that a couple of you mentioned. Children's schedules are just much, much more complex than they used to be. We have a lot more commitments. Children are expected to do various extracurricular activities throughout the day and often simply don't have time to play outdoors. And then because of a lot of diversity in family structures, sometimes kids are just going from one house to another, or they live at two places and switch back and forth every other week, and so that makes it difficult to carve out the time to play outdoors as well. We also know that people report there just aren't as many good places to play outside. I've heard that a lot. There used to be so many great vacant lots and cool places, and so there is more developed area now in the metro area than there was 20, 30 years ago. We have a change in how playgrounds have evolved, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And a lot of people feel they don't have proximity or access to natural areas. And so, when you think about your childhood experience, it may have been in Boundary Waters or hours away. But for most of us, it's someplace like the backyard or the bottom of the hill down the street. So what we as adults maybe think of as, well, that's not nature. When you're a child, it's absolutely nature. It absolutely qualifies. Even just a little grassy, overgrown weedy patch in the backyard can qualify as nature. But I think as adults, we tend to sort of idealize and romanticize our our definition of nature, and so we eliminate a lot of possibilities for young children. So here's another really big barrier for many people. There's the idea that we have to be able to control for all the risks, especially if you are a provider of care for children that are not your own. Like if you work in an early care and education setting or summer camps or a school, you might be responsible for 35 kids, none of whom are your own. And so putting them out in the woods where there are lots and lots of unknowns and unpredictable things is a big risk, not just to the children, but to you. Again, with this free-range parenting thing, we do have this cultural voice that's telling us, as a mother, I'm a mother, and as a mother, I hear a lot of cultural pressure to supervise my kids. Don't let them go off and play all alone at the parks. Make sure that you know what they're doing at all times. I remember once taking my children to a park, and they ran up the hill, way up the hill without me, and a few minutes later, some guy comes walking his dog, and he's like, "Are those your kids? They're so far away from you. Why aren't you with them?" And he was really genuinely offended and took it upon himself to let me know that I needed to be closer to my children when it was a big wide open hillside. There wasn't a lot of harm that seemed apparent. But I think we do have this pressure that we need to constantly be supervising and watching and managing what happens to children. There are a lot of legitimate concerns about insect-borne diseases or bee stings if you have bee sting allergy. There are very real risks. But as with the crime, fear, and anxiety that we have, I think we have a heightened sense of risk about risk. And so one thing that I like to encourage people to think about is, what is the difference when you think about children playing in nature? For some people, they look at this picture and think, "Oh, that's so great." And other people cringe when they see that because it looks dangerous, and there's not enough space between the children, and there's more than one kid going down the slide at one time. And so I think we need to challenge ourselves as adults to think about what's the difference between being as safe as possible and as safe as we need to be. Because I think there's a lot of room in between. And we have, as a culture, when it comes to our children, particularly when our children are playing, we have been striving for as safe as possible. And I don't think that that's to the benefit of our children. I think our children need to be safe, but I think they need to be as safe as they need to be. I don't think we need to make them immune to any risk. I don't think we can. So when we think about the limited number of hours young children get outside, and I work with a lot of schools and school districts, and they say, well, they have 20 minutes of recess every day. They're on the playground, so they're outside. That's great. I love that they're outside for 20 to 25 minutes a day. However, when children are playing on a play structure like this, the choices that are available to them in terms of what they get to do with their bodies, the choices are very limited. And we'll look a little bit, excuse me, I'm sorry. Take a look at this picture here of this play structure and tell me some of the things that you see happening. Okay, climbing, sliding, hanging. How many kids are doing something with another kid? How many kids are doing something that's going to be different the next time they do it? And how many choices do you see in terms of physical movements that a kid can make in this picture? So there's a ladder, so they can go up or down the ladder. Usually they can only go up, because if they climb down the ladder that's going up to the slide, they're going to get yelled at by a grown-up, because you're only supposed to go up the ladder and then down the slide. You can't go up the slide and you can't go down the ladder. So that's two choices. What's another choice that they have? they can go up the wall, so they can scramble in that particular way to get up that particular wall. And there's a bar here in the corner. I don't even know why I'm trying to reach the screen because it's so high, but there's a low balance beam down there. So that affords the opportunity to go back and forth and across. So there's a few different choices there for large motor activities. I think that if you spend much time around children in schools and playgrounds, you've probably noticed that there's not a lot of sand anymore. Most playgrounds have either like a rubberized ground, or they have mulch or gravel or crumb rubber, which is shredded tires. And that's in the interest of a number of different factors. But what that has done is remove the ability of children to manipulate even that part of their environment when they're in the playground. And we'll talk in a minute about why the ability to manipulate your physical environment is so important when you're a young child. But I bring that up now because I really want to point out how limiting this space is. It's very colorful and cool and huge and pretty awesome probably for the first 45 minutes or so if you're 6 or 7. But the amount of opportunity to collaborate and play with other children is severely limited. The amount of opportunity to really challenge one's body is really limited because once you've mastered the rock climbing wall, you've mastered the rock climbing wall. It's not going to be any different next time. And once you've gone up the ladder, your body knows how to do that, and it's never going to be any different, no matter if it's wet or dry or snowy. The ladder is always going to be 3-inch diameter rungs, and it's always going to be 6 feet high. So we've really eliminated a lot of variation, which is critically important for young children. And we'll get back to that in a minute. We have some really interesting research where people would go out and just watch children play. And they'd go to parks that had structured play materials like playground equipment, and off to the edges there would be trees or brushy areas or little stepping stone sorts of things. And so they would just watch children play. And these researchers noticed that children, whenever they had the chance, they would play on a play structure for a little bit, but then they would always try to get over to the natural areas, because that's where the diversity of experience is. That's where they get to try the new things. And so when they have the opportunity, they prefer to be able to be in a setting where they have a diversity of experiences, where they have the ability to manipulate their environment, such as a sandy place or a muddy place, or sometimes gravel in a playground is okay because it can really be used as building material. But oftentimes they don't have that medium to work with. You guys still have that really cool digging area for where the dinosaur bones are and the sand. That's such a great space. Children really can build and explore the properties of sand and different materials. And that's really important, especially for young children in their development. So here's the kind of climbing structure that really challenges children. Again, some of these pictures aren't for the faint of heart because for some people this is a nightmare scene. You would not put children or your neighbor's children in this scene at all because something could happen. But if you look at this climbing structure, which is also known as a fallen tree, there's a tremendous amount of diversity in what that kid who's scrambling up the log is experiencing. There's wet spots, there's icy spots, there's wide spots and narrow spots. He's probably going to go to the very end and feel how it starts to sway under his weight, and none of that will happen on a typical plastic play structure. And so what he's learning about his body and his abilities in doing this is something that he cannot learn in any other setting. Does that make sense? Yeah. So why else would the wilderness be so important to children, or wild places? So we know there's unlimited diversity there. There's millions of things to look at. There's millions of things to smell and hear. There's animals that live there. And that's so exciting to young children, just to know that they're in the home of animals and creatures other than humans. Knowing that it's a place that isn't created by grown-ups. I mean, think about how many places in a child's world are created by grown-ups, yeah.
We had a fun experience this last week where the children were doing some art activity, was inside, but anyway. But it was interesting, they were doing this, and then they started saying, these are 5th and 6th graders, so usually I don't hear this, and they started talking about, you know, adults aren't very creative, they're just not as creative as kids. You know, so it was just, that's what happens. And then one other thing that I want to mention is that when we're outside, one of the things one of the children asked, can I go climb a tree? Well, I thought if they climb a tree, then others that will try and will have something falling, and you know, it's dangerous. But I said, could I jump? And I don't think they asked. But anyway, they had to swim, jump and swim. And they said, okay, sure. So then a lot of them did that. That was so appealing because, you know, it's like you said, different. So there's an example of what you're talking about.
Well, and it's the kind of thing that if they can't do it, they can't do it. So they have to test and see, can my body hold me on this branch and can I swing? And then if I try to leap off, how's that gonna work?
And they just dropped, you know, but it was high enough they had to think about, because there was on the tree at the base. If you went up a little ways on the base, then you could maybe jump.
Yeah.
If you didn't, you couldn't. So they were learning the way to get up there.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example. Thank you for sharing that. That really perfectly illustrates the kind of diversity of experience that I'm talking about. And for every single child, that's different, because every single child weighs something different. And the heft of every child is different on the branch. And so that kind of experience is exactly what we need them to have. Again, because it's a place not created by adults, it can be very freeing for children who spend so much of their time, especially the younger ones, being told what to do, how to do it, where to go, when to sit down, when to stand up. I mean, they are really constantly being told how to behave and what to do. Another thing that I think is easy for us to take for granted is that outdoors in nature is one of the few places that children can really be loud and move their bodies in big ways. They are expected so often to use indoor voices. And when we allow them the freedom to just run and play and use big movements and run as fast as they can just to see how fast they can go, or swing from a branch and throw yourself down the hill, you know, those are experiences that kids need to have in order to learn what their bodies can do. And if we don't allow for that, you know, how are they going to figure out what their bodies can do? When are they going to do that experimenting? And then we also know that children, you know, developmentally have really fundamental needs, excuse me, that are satisfied by natural areas. They love to dig, they love to build, you guys have all seen that. They love to hide and make hiding spaces or find small rocks and acorns and pine cones and make little worlds out of them. Those are fundamental developmental needs that all children have. And so when we do things like take them out of nature and take away the loose parts on the playground that they can use for those little worlds, we've removed another tool for them to support their development. Yes?
Looking at that last picture, I couldn't help but think of how different that smells than that playground with the rubber and the paint and
Yeah.
very different.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And the sense of warmth. Have you ever been on one of those playgrounds with crumb rubber? They're so hot. But the warmth on a bunch of grass is so completely different. That's a great observation. So here's E.O. Wilson. Feel free to swoon. He is someone who created this idea called biophilia. He didn't create the idea, he articulated it. And basically what it means is that we as humans have this intrinsic need to be around and near other living things. And that we are naturally drawn to landscapes because we have a primal need to be in among other living things. And it's really important that he brought this into our minds, because I think we see that so clearly in children. They have such a clear need and clear desire and clear curiosity and wonder about other living things. And we have some very great scientific minds that are starting to really recognize the value of that. So in addition to this sense of wonder and freedom and physical growth, I want to talk just for a few minutes about developmental domains in early childhood. Excuse me. And so for some of you, this is all not new information. For some of you, it might be new, but essentially when we talk about young children's development, particularly up to about age 7 or 8, there are some areas that are really growing rapidly and really sort of being built through experience in early childhood, and those are social and emotional development, so relationships and how do I operate in this world? How do I work with other people? How do I know another person? And of course, what is the sense of me? What can I do? What is my body capable of? And what's important to me? And the cognitive domain, of course, is sort of your academic learning and your knowledge base that you're building through experience. And then, of course, your physical, your large and small motor skills. So the ability to balance and lift and climb. And then also in very young children, it's the ability to pick things up and move them and piece things together in patterns. And those are all really important skills that we take for granted because we can all do so many of them so well. And that's because when we were young children, we had lots and lots of opportunities to practice and to get support in those different domains. And so what we want to look at tonight is how does nature experience directly affect those domains of development. And so we'll talk a little bit more about physical. Again, pardon this image. Hopefully no one here is horrified that I let my children do that, but I did. So the ability to climb across big logs and rocks, the ability to learn how to balance on something that may be wet, actually the ability to balance on a log while the loud noise of a river is rushing past you. Again, that's not something that happens on a structured playground. This is one that I think is so, so important. The ability to really challenge one's own body. The example that you gave of the kids hanging from the tree. That's what it looks like when you're 4. Can I pick this branch up? How heavy is that gonna be? I can't do it, I better get a friend to help me. So think about how much is going on there with those 2 kids. First of all, in preschool, now these guys are probably lucky enough to go to someplace like Dodge preschool, so they have opportunities like this all the time. But a lot of kids who are in preschool, they have blocks that are all the same size. Or all the big ones are the exact same size and shape. And all the red ones are the exact same size and shape. So there's not very much diversity in the materials that they have available to them. But in a case like this, they really are challenged to lift and carry something that's so much bigger than themselves. And when you think about the sense of accomplishment that that can bring, it's really powerful. Again, I've talked about this, I think probably enough, but really I can't stress enough how important it is to have variation in physical spaces to climb on and move through. It's very important for balance and physical development. Here we are again with a spot that's just a wide open space in nature where someone can yell and throw and run as fast as she can just to see what she's made of. And we don't have, running on a soccer field during a game is a totally different experience than throwing your stuffed kitty and just dashing down the hill. It's very, very different. So the fine motor skills are developed when kids have natural elements, which we often refer to as loose parts. So when you think about children's toys or materials that children would use for playing, loose parts are defined as things that sort of can be anything. So rocks. In this picture, these kids are using that as they've made a train out of those rocks. Or it could be money, or it could be a snake. but it could be anything they want it to be because it's just rocks. And so suddenly there's this huge creative opportunity. In 15 minutes, they'll change it and it'll be something else. Whereas in a typical early childhood setting, they might have an assortment of small cars, which are only ever going to be cars. They're never going to be used as anything but cars. So loose parts are really important for kids to have access to because they have the opportunity to manipulate them and change them and make them into whatever they want. So we find that kids play more creatively and are more deeply engaged in play when they have materials that they've created out of loose parts. It's really fascinating.
We'll give you one example that we made up last summer. We had the children collect, these are 5th and 6th graders. So they collected little pebbles, and then we had a piece of wood, and you make something. It was like a mosaic, but with pebbles. And it was very awesome. Some of them made some amazing things with the pebbles. So they glued the pebbles on the wood. So they made mosaics out of different little teeny pebbles.
That's
So one
great.
fine order and then imagination, however you want.
Yeah.
You're supposed to do what? No, you use your creative imagination, and you come up with, and it's so easy. This pie is easy to find. And they can decide. Some are different colored, and so they can figure out what they want.
Yeah.
And the result was amazing.
Yeah, they can really create some beautiful things, and just listening to the way that they play with loose parts is really interesting. The way that they describe what they're doing or what they've, if you ask, what is that rock? And the way that they describe it can be really interesting. So we also look at how children develop socially and emotionally when they're playing in nature outdoors. We know that they play more creatively. There's study upon study that looks at how they play. Again, loose parts are huge in helping foster that creative play because they need to have the cognitive flexibility to be able to use something again and again for different purposes. We know that children, when they're playing in natural settings, tend to play with one another for longer periods of time than they do in an indoor setting or in a structured playground. Interestingly, there was a study that just watched kids play. There's a group of kids playing just with kids and a group of kids playing with adults, kind of initiating activities like, oh, look, here's some pine cones, let's make a fairy house. And the children that had no adult interference, I think the study called it guidance or suggestion, but where the adults kind of just backed off and let the children initiate and engage on their own terms, those kids stayed engaged in dramatic play and creative play for almost twice as long as the children who were kind of given suggestions and ideas by the adults. So it's important to note that when kids have the opportunity to initiate and construct their own play scenarios with other children, they're often more deeply engaged and more likely to collaborate and work together. And as most of us know, nature has a calming influence on many of us. So oftentimes teachers will find that when things are just getting too heated in the classroom, if they can go outside and everyone can take a little break outdoors, it's often just what everybody needs to calm down. There's that sense of calm that a lot of people feel when they're outdoors and enjoying fresh air and sunshine, and the diversity of visual stimuli can really do a lot to sort of bring aggression down and help children cooperate better and get along better with one another. So we also know that particularly in ages 3, 4, 5, children are really starting to develop a sense of kind of that spiritual or reflective self, and they might not be able to articulate that, but these are the years when it really starts. Many children talk about feeling like there's something bigger than themselves, or they just feel they feel like they're safe, or they feel like they're taken care of. So talking to young children, often when they're having an experience in nature like this, it can be one of the very first experiences that they have of spirituality or aesthetic sensibility, of just sort of a feeling of peace and beauty. And again, this is something that I think we often forget about when we talk about working with young children is the idea that they need time and space to reflect and to think about what's beautiful, what meaningful, what experience, what's beautiful and meaningful for them. And so often outdoor experiences and time in nature provides those in a way that just can't happen inside. Does that make sense? Okay, so more of a social emotional skill building. When you think about how children have to work together in a setting like this to make this snow fort, these guys had to work together to solve problems and figure out how to do something together. What's really interesting is if you look at a bunch of young kids around 5 and younger doing something like this, they'll often just sort of do it. They'll just sort of figure out how to do it together and do it. But as children get older, the social roles and responsibilities start to come out. So one child might assume the role of the leader and tell everybody what they need to do, and someone else might decide how big the snow fort needs to be, and someone else might decide where it needs to go, and so they'll have an argument or a discussion about how the snow fort is going to be built. And so it's really, it's really a good opportunity for children to be able to learn those skills of negotiation and collaboration and how to work together just by making a simple snow fort. So then we have our cognitive development. And there's a lot happening when you think about when a child is outdoors. For so many years of a child's life, every single thing that they encounter is the very first time they've encountered it. It's brand new. And so, gosh, that's so amazing. So they have all these diverse, incredible bits of information coming in all the time through every sense. And when you think about what kind of impact that has on the brain, it's really amazing. And so this is when they really start to take cognitive risks. You know, we would look at a boulder in the ground and think, you know, it wouldn't even occur to half of us to try to move a boulder. But to a little kid, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you try to move that big boulder? So taking cognitive risks is a really important part of nature play as well. And again, not something that can happen on a structured playground, not something that can happen on a soccer field. This is another time when a child will ask himself, what can I do? Can I move that boulder? And to be able to try that, it's okay if you can't. It's a cognitive risk, but that's how you learn. That's how you learn what you're made of. So thinking about how other cognitive skills are developed in early childhood, nature is a perfect context for them to be thinking about the scientific process. And we don't need to articulate that to them necessarily. There's nothing wrong with it if you do, but when you think about the skills of science, which are asking questions and making observations about the world and trying different theories out and making predictions and explaining what happened. Those are all the things that young children are doing all the time. So when they're having a nature experience and they're given the freedom to try stuff out, you're really helping them to develop a habit of scientific thinking that's very important later in life. And young children are actually the most natural scientists there are, because this is the way they operate in the world every single day. That's really all they do, is just try stuff out and talk about it. We know that it's important to learn how to select and use appropriate tools, which is such a, I think when we think about technology, it's so easy to think about digital devices, digital cameras, iPads, whatnot, but really in early childhood, tools, any kind of tool is technology. A shovel for digging is technology, or a hat that you can use to scoop water is a form of technology. And so when children have the opportunity to try to come up with different tools to do different jobs, you're giving them the opportunity to really practice some more scientific thinking and acting. And also, getting your feet wet and muddy and playing in the sand if you were a grown-up and a scientist, you would call that exploring properties of and states of matter. Kids would call it just wading in the stream, but as adults and as educators, you know, that's a very important scientific practice to be able to explore and articulate and understand the differences in properties and states of matter. So again, there's a lot of cognitive development happening here, even though it looks really just like playing in the mud. There's a lot of sophisticated stuff happening. When kids are allowed to build forts, there's so much cognitive skill development happening. To be able to estimate how to lay a log across, or a branch across a log in order to make a wall. In order to estimate how many branches you need in order to make a shelter. And to be able to figure out how to create a structure like that. If a child is lucky enough to have the opportunity to make a fort like that, it's a great feat of engineering. And young children, you know, as young as 2 and 3 can do this, no problem. It's really wonderful. Also, we get mathematical thinking happening here. We get kids experimenting with weight and mass when they pick up things like rocks, or butterflies, or logs, or pine cones. When children notice and observe patterns and talk about patterns and talk about what they see, that's an opportunity for them to develop mathematical and algebraic thinking. When children talk to you about this butterfly is orange and black and it has 6 legs, or I know that that's a male cardinal because it's all red. They're telling you some, what we call measurable attributes. And those are important things for children to learn how to do. And that diversity that's provided by nature offers them so many more opportunities to do that than a typical early childhood classroom or an indoor setting where, you know, they might have an assortment of blocks, but in general, all the blocks are pretty consistently the same. Did you have that question over here? I thought I saw someone. No, okay. All right, what are some of the other things? You guys have heard probably of 21st century learners. It's kind of a newer buzzword in education where we not only want our kids to grow up to be really smart and well-versed in a lot of different disciplines, we want them to be 21st century learners. And that's kind of defined by someone who's confident, who can face challenges with a positive attitude, someone who has self-control and the ability to self-regulate, someone who demonstrates empathy, motivation, perseverance, and optimism. Those are the qualities that we want our children to develop as they grow. And so when I think about how these sorts of characteristics are supported by taking risks outdoors and trying different things and having different experiences in a natural setting, I think that there's a lot of support for these sorts of characteristics. Optimism is one of my favorite ones. I think about when kids try to make forts and they will try and try and try and try and not stop until the fort is built to their satisfaction, which is awesome. I have a colleague who's an engineer, and she said most 6-year-olds have more perseverance and optimism than the most seasoned engineer, because as adults, we're so quick to give up on things. But if you're a young child and you're determined to make a fort out of sticks or snow, you're not going to stop till it's done the way you want it to be done. And that really demonstrates a sense of extreme perseverance and optimism, because not only will they keep doing it, they fully expect it to work out. They absolutely know that it is going to work out. So what are some things that we can do then as a community, excuse me, to support play? Someone earlier mentioned that we have to be role models, adults who clearly value play and find time for it and room for it in our lives and in our communities. So there's a great opportunity to do it here. The nature play area, I think, speaks volumes to parents in this community about how we make time for that for our children. Spending time outside as a family. Earlier I mentioned that many people who have grown up to be sort of stewards of the environment or people who do work on behalf of nature report that childhood experiences with a caring parent were among the most meaningful experiences that they had and some of the most influential moments of their lives. And so being outside as a family really does tell children that you value their curiosity and you value their question and you value their experience. And that is possibly the most important thing. But it's also important to get out of the way. Remember the research that I mentioned that talked about how when adults make suggestions or provide ideas or guidance too much to children, they tend to be less involved and less immersed in their play. So learning how to stand back and just get out of the way is really important too. And that is a very difficult one. I remember when my son was probably, I guess 3 or 4. Excuse me, I'm sorry. 3 or 4, he started climbing a tree, and it was a little apple tree. It wasn't very high, but he was my son, and he was only 3. And I was, I'm a nature play weirdo, and I'm standing there just wringing my hands because here he was climbing this tree, and I knew he was gonna fall. I couldn't stand it, but I know the value of letting him climb that tree. And to me, that supersedes my own anxiety about letting him climb the tree. So I had to stand back, wring my hands, grit my teeth. He didn't fall out of the tree. He did great. He had a great time. He climbed the tree. He thought he was the king of the world. But it was a really powerful lesson for me because it was so hard. As much as I know all of this stuff is true and important, when it's a child that you care so deeply about, it's often really hard to just get out of the way. When there's someone leaning over the edge of the dock, your instinct is often to, grab him by the ankle or tell him to stand up or make him get behind the railing. But, we also have to ask ourselves, what's the worst that could happen and am I okay with that? Of course, not the worst that could happen, let's be reasonable. Potentially, someone could fall in and get wet and be bummed out. But likely anything worse than that, it's very, very unlikely. So as adults, it's really important to challenge ourselves to stand back and let kids do this stuff. It's often the hardest thing though. Again, recognizing the value of things like rocks and sticks and letting kids collect those things and bring them in and play with. If you have a setting where you're caring for children, bringing that stuff and making it available so that they can use them as play materials. And then just letting them play for the sake of playing. I think, excuse me, as we, I hear from a lot of educators that when they do let children just sort of roam and play in nature, children don't know what to do or they don't know how to play. I've heard that quite a bit, and I think it might seem to be true at first, but the more time they spend outside and the more they realize that they have the freedom to play, the quicker that comes back to them. I don't believe that children can forget how to play. I think they just need more time than we might expect to remember sometimes. And so just really letting them just play and just mess around and do stuff, even if it doesn't make any sense to us. And celebrating mess, that's also a really hard one for a lot of parents to do. But it's also one of the best because it's really, really important for kids to be able to get messy. And I've seen so many children who are averse to mess, and certainly there are some children who have sensory reasons for that, but there are also a lot of children who are just terrified of getting wet or dirty because that's just not allowed. And I think we need to really take a long look at that and let children be a little bit more free to get muddy and dirty and hop in puddles if they can, and because they dry off and they rinse off. And that's an important lesson too for kids. I have a friend who teaches preschool science, and she said one of the most important things that she has seen is when children spill water on themselves, like spill water on your lap or something. It's really important to let that happen because the water dries. And children need to know that water dries. And if it spills on you, it's okay. And there's a whole scientific reason why that's an important experience for children to have as well. But just in terms of the emotional and social development of having something like that happen, just knowing that the water's gonna dry and you're gonna be okay. Or, you know, I might be walking on a log and I might fall and scratch my knee, but I'm gonna be okay. Those are the kinds of things that build resilience in children. And we need to be able to make space for that. Another thing that we as adults need to do, I think, is think about what we are comfortable with. People have really mixed feelings about sticks. And so I think sticks are a perfect place to start a conversation because there's a lot of value in playing with sticks. There's a lot to be learned from lifting and moving and stacking and breaking and wielding sticks. And that's a really difficult thing for a lot of adults to think about. This is such a controversial issue. I still can't believe it sometimes, but it is a very hot button issue for people. But again, I just think we have to really figure out for ourselves as people who care for children, what is an appropriate level of risk? What can we be okay with allowing? Can you be okay with allowing a kid to carry a stick on an icy pond? Maybe, maybe not. If not, that's okay. What can you be okay with? So I think as adults, we really have a responsibility as we know these things and we know how important this stuff is. We are obligated to think about how can we back off a little bit and let children have a little bit more risk in their lives, knowing that there's such benefit to it. Again, I think another trap that we grown-ups fall into is feeling like we have to have the answer all the time. And knowing if, you know, someone picks up a caterpillar or a flower, we have to know the name of it. People who work in education often feel like we need to have all the answers. But honestly, half the time, kids don't really care what the name of a caterpillar is because they're gonna name it Frank or Harold or Nancy anyway. They don't care. But we as grown-ups get so hung up on feeling like we have to know the answer to everything. Again, though, I think the fundamental thing, all we can really do is just go out and play and support children in doing that and creating opportunities for them to do that. Now I'm gonna stop talking because I'm feeling like I'm not gonna have a voice in a few minutes, but are there any questions or comments that anyone would like to make? Excuse me, sorry. Any thoughts? Yes.
Do you perceive like kids being able to identify places outside that were created by adults or not created by adults?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. So what
do they treat them? Is there anything that shows that they treat them differently? I mean, because like for a kid, I don't know if they're really savvy in identifying what was created by adults and what was not created by adults. Certainly at the very earliest ages, it seems as if there's just this big broad world around.
Right. Are you talking about nature play places specifically? Or like a playground versus a natural area?
Yeah, in some cases both. Are they able to distinguish, and if so, does that actually, is there recorded stuff that says, yeah, well, they will do this or that differently in different spots?
I think what affects it is that things that are created by grown-ups impose a structure of how to play. And so they play that way. So a playground structure tells you how to play with it because it's a ladder and slide. Whereas a hill and a pond or a puddle doesn't tell you how it needs to be played with in the same way that a structure that's built by a human does. Does that make sense?
Yeah, some, but I mean, like at a snow fort, kids don't make snow forts. I mean, not the age that you were showing. That stuff, like that's a construct made by adults that were with them, so that they can be successfully in there. But then they still play with it to their own. In their own different way that they choose. So I don't know, is that I'm asking about a gray area, which I don't really fully understand.
No, I think it's a really interesting point. I think what I'm stuck on is the structure that an adult creates tells the kid how to play with it. So whether that's a fort or a,
But is that always the case though too? Because I've seen kids very creative playing on even the lamest playground equipment, where they're having their own crazy running battle for no good reason.
yeah, I'm not sure if there's a lot of research about that.
I think sometimes just the creating, kids building their own fort, and then they might be bored with it and go away. But the fun part is building,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
whether it's a fort or just building a tent or whatever.
yeah. And the dramatic play that can happen in a cardboard box or a forest or a play structure down the street is something of a child's construct. And the prop or the background, which is the box or the forest or the play structure, becomes irrelevant because their world is their imaginary dramatic play that's happening. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
I've read about the increase in allergies and autoimmune diseases that are suspected to be caused by children not having enough exposure to dirt. Do you know anything new about that?
I do not know anything new about that. Do you guys know much about, these are some nature play experts here in the back. So have you guys heard of any of that research or?
Haven't read it.
If you email me, I do have a couple articles that are really kind of starting to look at that. I think there's a lot of theories about the increase in allergies and autoimmune diseases, and to my understanding, there's not really a clear answer at this point. Certainly, if you look at cultures where children, are outside for hours and hours and hours at a day and have fewer incidences of asthma, that's certainly something to be interested in. So there's a lot of research, I think, that's sort of people are just starting to ask those questions. All right. Well, thank you very much for sticking around, and I appreciate so much the opportunity to be here. And we can't go check out the nature play space, right? This was closed. But I was thinking we could take you over and go test it out another day though.
But there's a lot of trees outside we can play in instead.
Excellent.
Or
We
grassy.
don't follow the monkey yet though. Okay. You're right, that's when we separate.